This is a test of the emergency broadcast system.
In 5, check for sound. 4,
it's showtime.
3,
let's
2,
go.
1.
This is the Pro Audio Suite, a podcast for audio and voiceover professionals. Your hosts, Robert Marshall from Source Elements and Someone in Chicago, Darren Robbo Robertson from Voodoo Sound Sydney, from LA, George Whittam, the tech to the VO stars, and myself, Andrew Peters, voice talent and home studio guy from Melbourne. Now, thanks to Rode microphones, let's get on with the show. Welcome to another Pro Audio Suite. Thanks to Rode microphones and Harlan Hogan's VoiceOver Essentials, the home of the Portabooth Pro. Once again, we're joined by Beau, Stephenson and Carson, Beck. But what we didn't do last week was get some background. So, Beau, what's your main gig?
Well, I'm a voice actor, full-time. That's my main gig. And my background is theater and live performance. Played in a lot of bands when I was young. And so that's my background. That's where I come from. I also worked a lot in production on film. I kind of fell into voiceover because it's kind of a natural access point of skills that I have. And my wife, who's a costume designer, she did wardrobe on all these different productions, and she kept saying, "Beau, there's all of these people that they have these huge resumes, and it's all voiceover. You could do that." And I was like, whatever. And I was living near Salt Lake for a couple of years, and I had a small-time agent there, and she sent me out on a ton of stuff, and I'd always just eat it in the in-person auditions. I just would. But she sent me out on a voiceover thing for a documentary. I'm actually doing an Irish accent, a character. Anyway, I went in there and smashed it. It was fun, and I booked it. And so that kind of planted the seed. Fast forward a couple of years to 2013, we moved to LA for her work and also for me to kind of expand my work. And I was like, I should give that a more focus because I had been kind of building a music studio. And I'm like, well, I got the equipment and I booked one before, so let's give it a go. So I started auditioning a lot and it grew into this. So that's kind of how I got to this point.
So what sort of a studio have you got?
I have a room in here with got Amphion monitors in here. My signal chain for voiceover is a 416 microphone going into an Avalon 737 channel strip. And then my capture card is the Apollo Twin. I have the full Apollo line in here. I've got a 16 and X8P that I run for my music productions. I've got the Twin dedicated. All of the I.O. and ins on the Twin are dedicated to my voiceover business. And then all of the other I.O. that I have from the other interfaces are dedicated to music. So I can kind of keep those two works.
For the stuff that makes money. Yeah. And all the expensive stuff is for the hobby.
Well, no, but the Twin, there's nothing cheap about the Twin. The Twin's amazing. It's just
I'm just kidding.
But just so people know, because a lot of that equipment, as you can see, like the smaller and more prosumer it becomes, it is cheaper. But the nice thing about the Apollo line, as we were talking about last week, is that they've kind of maintained a cohesiveness across their line. And so, yeah, I've got it all set up that way. And
before we move on, I actually do have to initiate you into some Pro Audio Suite protocols. There is no such thing as a 416 on this show. It will be henceforth known trans-specifically as the 416, which is a hybrid of the Australian 416 and the American 416.
Oh, nice.
So,
that's our mission. This is actually the reason why the podcast was started, was
the 416
to change the name to the 416. That was, once that happens, the podcast is being shut down.
Yep, exactly. We've achieved our goal. Our other guest is Carson, Beck. Carson, what's your background?
Well, hi. It's good to be back. So much like Beau, I also started in performance. I did a lot of stage acting growing up. I grew up in the Seattle area, and I had a family that all came from radio, and so naturally my first job out of high school was in radio, just doing production. I wasn't trying to voice or be an on-air personality or anything, but being in radio gave me a chance to learn the production ropes and start to fall a little in love with the production side of things, and also open my eyes to what voicing really is. And then when I was about halfway through my education at University of Southern California, or also known as University of Spoiled Children, I got pointed in the direction of doing audiobooks. And that was what spurred me to build my first studio and started taking it more seriously. Had a couple friends in the drama department that clued me into some auditions that were being passed down from external companies. And my friend was like, well, you actually do this voice acting thing. We're all just stage actor people, so you should audition for this. It was a game called Life is Strange, and that was my first video game booking. Meanwhile, I was transitioning from audiobooks into, into more commercial stuff. And kind of just getting the ball rolling, and was lucky to have some giants in the industry, Randy Thomas being the main one, to kind of champion me into the business. And so, yeah, it's been a number of years now where at this point I'm doing commercial VO full time, and luckily that gives me a lot of opportunity to keep working on music. I mix a lot. That's probably what I focused on the most, but I also I play drums, bass, piano, and all that stuff. And Beau and I work together a ton on music stuff, as well as being colleagues in VO. So having been able to share that path, it kind of means we both get to share some experiences now. And so, yeah, we both have a bunch of fancy gear that's that none of it is actually used for the paid stuff. It's just for the hobby.
Actually, talking about gear, George actually has the Rodecaster Pro, which has a complete sound effects library.
That
interesting.
Scared me. That was quite loud.
Scared the crap out of me.
George, I was waiting for that.
It just made Robbo actually did fart.
I thought someone fired a gun.
That was too loud. Sorry about that.
That was violent.
Dear.
We digress.
So what gear are you running in your studio?
So my VO chain is a 41.6 to a Avalon 737, and I actually flip back and forth between the hardware and the plug-in, just depending on other projects I have going at the time. And as we discussed in the Apollo episode, it's great to have a plugin that reliable that models my hardware. So if I need to switch them out or if I'm on the road, I can get the same sound. And I actually use the SSL E channel for an expander, and then just goes right to Pro Tools. And depending on what the project is, I have a mastering chain for Audition, or if it's a real session, it's nice and simple and minimalistic. But that's a pretty classic rig.
Do you typically keep the expander in line with most of your voice sessions, or is it more for like promos?
I do.
No, I keep it on pretty much all of the time. It's really gentle.
Yeah.
It's not doing very much at all. You'll certainly never hear it. But in the times when it really counts on the...
I can hear your breath chopping.
Well, because I actually bumped up my gain stage a little bit to serve through Source Connect. Normally, I'm not running this additional stage of limiting on here, so that might be why you're hearing more of it. But yeah, it's pretty much on all of the time. I tinkered around with suppressing any level of noise a lot, and found a lot of options that were not transparent enough for my ear, and I don't want to hear it. I don't want it to be obvious in my audio at all. But the other thing is, it's not like I'm making up for a noisy space. It's mostly from my own noises. My space is quiet enough. It's just mostly like you say, breaths, or bump the stand, or rustle the shirt, stuff like that.
Like what you're saying, Carson, in with the expander, you don't even have to have it take the noise floor away. You just slightly lower it.
3 to 4 dB of reduction.
Right. Yeah, very little.
It's funny, just because me as like a post engineer, if I was in session with you, I'd be like, can you turn that off? Especially an expander. I don't know why, but I just feel like it's all going to get cut tight anyways.
If you have it set right, it doesn't do any of that. I mean, today I was on with 3 different engineers, and none of them even mentioned it. I mean, if there happens to be a time where they're like, they don't want it, sure, I'll bypass it. It's fine. But for most things, you don't.
The time it gets heard is whenever you have a spot where it's like the PSA and there is nothing else.
Right.
Can I tell you a quick story about the expander? So we were at VO Atlanta, Robert, and and you guys had that pop-up studio.
Yeah, you're using the hell out of the API.
I begged you to use your pop-up.
I agree. There's definitely a space for it and a time for it, and
I was trying to run without, because my girlfriend at the time was doing an actual gig on Source Connect,
but we really were trying to hide the weenie there.
We really were.
You're doing a gig, and you're in a freaking hotel during a convention with blankets over you.
There's double doors on either side with corridors outside.
Yeah, there.
And the guy was like, and the engineer was like, hey, I think there's a door open I'm hearing some voices. Can you shut that door? And I'm just like, sure, just a moment. I stepped up and took about 10 seconds, turned on the API expander, -6 or whatever it was, like, 6 dB range, blah, blah, blah. He's like, there we go. Thank you. I was like, yes.
Well, and like I said, because my signal was coming in low here, so I added the LA2A legacy. So that's boosting and making all of this more apparent. Even before the COVID situation, I've done, and Beau as well, have done like dozens of national things from home. And when I was first starting to get bigger campaigns, I was hesitant. I was like, oh, these are the big time engineers. They're going to call me out on my shit. They're going to say, turn that compressor off, turn that EQ off. And nobody has ever said a thing, because if you're just subtle enough about it, they know what they can work with.
And that's what I love about the Avalon. It's subtle.
What do you see them running at, like Margarita Mix or Lime or any of those places that you frequent when you're going in? Because a lot of studios, they're running, it's like, what's the chain? It's a Hardy and a 416, done, in. Everything else is like cut. No expanders, because you're just cutting tight.
So actually, yeah, one of my favorite engineers to work with is at Margarita Mix, and since we've transitioned to working from home, he runs through an Avalon normally when we're there, and I know what his workflow is, so I'll basically recreate exactly what he would do for me if I were in the studio, so that he's working with the same stuff. But other than that, if I don't have a relationship with somebody, I don't know what they prefer, I'm going to give them a good starting point in terms of what represents my voice best for just fullness, brightness, and, just that little tiny bit of pushing down the area in between. And like Beau said, if it's ever noticeable, if anybody ever has a problem with it, I turn it off. But in, 4 some odd years, nobody's ever mentioned it, so...
I mean, for the most part, those are the breaths that are chopped out anyways when you're editing.
Right. Well, and it doesn't really take away the breaths either if you have it set right. That's the thing. You keep the breaths, they're just a little bit...
They kind of pop in a different way. Like they're kind of like...
Well, yeah, if you set it poorly. If you set it poorly, it will do that. That's why the SSL specifically, it's a really good one. The API... I could never get it to sound as smooth. The only other one that I like as much is the RVox. That one's really good as well.
Oh yeah,
very well set.
But that's not you can't use that as an insert in console,
no, you can't.
Unfortunately.
before I used all of this console stuff, that's the one I would always use. But in the legacy one, sounds great. It takes up less DSP, but the expander works exactly the same. So
yep.
I remember the drummers always being really nice as gates.
It's funny you talk about gates, because Robbo and I have been talking about that this week. I've been playing around with Isotope RX7, Steinberg Restore Rig, and Waves NS1. RX7 and Restore Rig are filters, and NS1 is actually a gate.
Yeah, it's a multi-band expander. There's also a Dolby hardware piece that was a lot like that, I think. And I think there's also the 43. Is that the other one that they make, which is more like one slider instead of a bunch of 4 or 5 sliders? But it's a similar approach to Cedar. Cedar's also the same way, where it's not.
Yeah, Cedar has a standalone box, by the way. If you have an extra $3,432, it's a preamp, a double channel preamp with a
one
DS.
click buy on Amazon. That's what I just did.
Yes, it is that in real time, no latency. Just you can literally have that.
I use the C6 in that same way, or the C4 from Waves. It's just a multi-band expander, and that can be really useful in a noise reduction context.
I don't like it because it kind of clips the breaths.
Gets a little
You
gaspy.
want the full football of the breath.
No, it doesn't clip the breaths. In that case, it just kind of changes it makes it more like...
The trick there is to just breathe like that normally. You know what I mean?
Is that an expander? No, I've got emphysema.
That should be the name of an expander plugin. Just call it emphysema.
Yeah, that's right.
I was working on a podcast for a major Australian telco about a week or so ago, and got the feedback back from the client that the guest was breathing too much.
So
I mean, that's a real problem.
Yeah,
that's the other thing is there's different technique that ggets applied when you go into a read, whether it's for commercial. It's different in a podcast because you're just speaking conversationally. But when you're reading, a 30-second spot, there's, I don't know, maybe Beau does the same thing, I'm not sure. But you just kind of flip into a different way of speaking, and all of a sudden you're more aware of how your breaths are, and you start to breathe differently and more quietly. At least, the professionals I've met seem to do that, and I think that's where I picked up trying to do that and not make my breaths as gaspy, because breath control is a major part of being able to get through some of these sessions, especially if you do car stuff or anything retail that's a little more pushed.
Part of training for voiceover would be you actually do a course in free diving.
Yes.
Which means you can actually hold your breath for about 4 or 5 minutes. It's a good tip.
I saw a classic meme on, which sums this up probably. I saw a classic meme on Facebook during the lockdown which said, make sure you wash your hands for 20 seconds every time you go outside, unless you're a voiceover artist, in which case you need to do it in 15.
Oh,
good.
man.
That's really good.
You know what? I have 30 seconds, 15 seconds, or 60 seconds baked into my DNA. I can feel when I'm approaching.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's weird how you start to
threshold.
develop that sixth sense.
And you start, that's funny because you start to budget your words as you're saying them. I remember doing this campaign and we had to do like 300, 800 numbers. But the funny thing about 800 numbers is you have the same amount of time, but like different numbers have more syllables than others.
Yep.
So you just have to you have to just adjust. And I got really tuned into that word budgeting and those time
Call
constraints.
888-888-8888.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. You get it baked in there and you don't even need a stopwatch because your panic starts to kick in.
Yep.
You know
Real
when
talk.
you're on the line with like a really good voice talent because you say, can you take like here's your time. It was whatever. Like we need this because even a 30, even though you say you have 30 in your head, it's not always 30 seconds. It's more like we need this in 25.
Right. Exactly. Whatever the cutoff is.
That. And so, and you're like, oh, hey, Beau, that was 24. Because I'll always take like my first couple takes. I'll say, just do it 3 in a row, and I'm going to give you times in between. You guys do it, and I'm like 24. We need it in 22. Like do it again. It's like 23. Last one's like 22. We're like, great, there's your pace. And let's do a bunch more. And it's like you guys seem to have like a nuclear clock in your head.
Yeah. It's weird how you start to develop that sense. I have to do that a lot with Ford when we update offers for sales events. And sometimes they'll like throw in an extra line about extra benefits for first responders, but the rest of the spot is still the same. So all of a sudden you have to make up all of that time and squeeze in the words. And sometimes you're watching the copywriters realize that it's not possible to add all those lines and still make it sound natural. So it's that little push and pull, which is always the fun part for me. It's like a little puzzle you're trying to figure out.
You always have to show them that it doesn't work.
Well, I can be the same way too. Like it helps to hear something out loud with the music and everything. You're like, okay, now that definitely sounds like too much.
Yeah, here's one. I used to have the L'Oreal account for many, many years. And of course, the delivery was always kind of soft and warm, and it was all about skincare and hair care. But 9 times out of 10, the script was overwritten. So you've got to sound like it's warm and natural, but you're just trying to squeeze in the words. But you had to make it sound like it wasn't a race
Fast,
call,
but not
you know.
fast. Yeah.
But you're still running in like a crazy.
I
man
always
to try and
tell
get through
people
it.
it's like country without the twang. Like read it fast and don't sound fast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or the inverse is when there's not enough copy, but they want more energy. And so you start to add energy and then your speed starts to go up. And then you have to try to be excited, but not too fast. And you're like, this feels so weird.
Overemphasis on the wrong syllable. That's right.
Yep, there it is.
Now, we mentioned last week we were going to talk about Luna as we're on this UA bent.
Oh yeah, Luna.
You guys are right into Luna as well by the sounds.
Probably me, so a little bit more than Carson. But we both kind of experienced the whole demo thing at NAMM and ended up hanging out with Fab DuPont over with the Pure Mix guys and kind of, he's been very closely tied to the development of that and basically got a really deep understanding of what the philosophy is with this DAW. And then since it's come out, I've done probably 8 or 9 full production mixes on it. And I love it. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know anything about Luna, it's a DAW that Universal Audio dropped this year. And it's for free for anybody who has an Apollo interface. If you've got an interface, you're entitled to a license. You can go download it. And basically what it does is the environment is based around Luna extensions and DSP-based plugins. And so the extension side runs all native, and then all of the plugins, like as you would in console, run via DSP. And so the relationship between that and then the Thunderbolt interface is that they can get really, really low latencies. So just as an example of how exciting that actually is in practice, the very first session that I tracked in, I had 3 different virtual instrument tracks. And then I assigned 3 different MIDI controllers to those tracks. And then I loaded up the tracks with a bunch of UAD processing. And then I had 2 auxiliary effects, delay and reverb and stuff running on those. And then a vocal track, same thing, loaded to the 9s. I was able to run all of those in one take with 2 milliseconds of latency. So basically no perceivable latency. So that's the exciting thing that Luna does is it allows you to have that insanely low latency. The other thing that's kind of novel about it is you don't have to worry about buffers, and you don't have to worry about if you're recording in 44.1 or 96 or 48 or 88. It doesn't matter. In fact, in a session, you can pull files in from all different kinds, and Luna just kind of takes care of it in the background. And so what I like to do is track in 96 and then mix in 48 so I can get more resources. And then when I go to mix down, I go back to 96. Just for me, I like the way the compressors respond in 96. I think they respond a little bit cleaner. And so it's a really neat environment. For me, the only thing that I'm waiting on for them to improve is the editing process. Right now I've been going AAF, not AIFF or whatever the format is, but AFF, where it basically creates a mirror project that you can open in whatever DAW. So I go to Logic to do all my editing, and then I come back. And so the mixing in Luna is amazing just because of the way it's laid out. Everything's organized really, really great. You can set up your IOs and you can set up your buses and everything extremely quick. And they also have Neve summing built in, which is awesome. You can adjust your headroom and
for an added
the
charge.
Impedance. Yeah, that is not free. The summing does cost, and then they've also got their tape emulations built into each channel as well. So the first time I mixed a project in Luna, it was really cool. I got all the tracks set up, did all my Neve summing on my groups, and then I added tape emulation, and I went through and added the right tape settings for each group. And by the time I had that, and then my levels and panning, it was like 90% done. I mean, and it was remarkable how little processing I had to use to get there because of these, the built-in sonics of Luna. So anyway, that's kind of the rundown of Luna. I think it's great. I think it makes a lot of sense for singer-songwriters, for studios that want to have that low latency, live analog feel. It's really, really cool.
If anybody wants to hear what the early days of digital recording really were like, go back and try to find a copy of a CD from like GRP. That label did like jazz recordings, like big band recordings in like the late 80s with a completely digital all the way through. Digital mixing, tracking.
Digital instruments, digital players.
Digital people.
Like real music, real performers.
Digital room.
But digital everything. It is so sterile sounding. It is so bizarre because they swung the pendulum because they could. They tracked everything through these digital tools and did, from mix to master everything. And it was
because they didn't have unison plugs.
What's like the darkest days of audio? Is it Mackie ADAT? Is it like cassette 4 tracks? Like what was like the depths of like pseudo?
When was audio production at its sonically worst overall, but not going back to like the 40s, but
correct. Like I'd say post Beatles. What's the worst?
I want to say like 2003 was pretty bad.
I mean, it's like, okay, so like, would you rather have a TIAC 3340 or a ADAT, for example?
Because I'm familiar with it, probably the ADAT, because I'm familiar with how to use it. But.
Well, it's just an analog 4-track.
Mini disc.
Okay, like or literally like someone now would probably take a 1/2-inch 8-track over an ADAT, but and the ADAT's probably doesn't
especially
sound
if you're
as
Dave
pleasing.
Grohl.
Right. It is interesting because
David
it's like
Grohl you speak of?
Yes, our Lord and Savior.
That one.
Yes. Well, being the oldest person here, I've gone from 1/4-inch tape, vinyl, cartridges, CDs, mini disc, DAT tapes.
DAT tapes, wow.
Mm-hmm. I've still got
archived a lot of DAT tapes in my time.
Full of them.
So
I mean, when I was building these studios 12, 13 years ago, where Pro Tools was still king for the most part, for a lot of my clients, we still had DAT machines just to roll a backup because they'd be in their booth and Pro Tools crashed 20 minutes ago.
but bringing Pro Tools back to it, and you talk about like the inline low latency workflow of Luna. It's kind of funny because Avid established that with like TDM, and that was like the whole beauty of it. Is like you got a microphone, throw plugins on it, record it, monitor right through that channel, and none of like the side console split work that you now have with what was previously like if you're using Apollo with Pro Tools, you essentially have your on the side low latency monitor, and that's what Luna gets rid of. You're now inline, just like mixers went from split to inline. It's a similar move. Avid was doing that, years ago. I still run that classic HD system just because of that.
Well,
I think it even works better than the HDX system, actually.
Well, the similarity there is that you're offloading so much of the workload to the integrated hardware. Yeah, so that's where the similarity is that's why Luna is purely integrated with the Apollo, and that's how they get away with it. And
well, in the other part of it is that Luna, the requirements for Luna to do all of this is you have to run it off of an SSD, you have to have Thunderbolt, and you have to have the DSP. And so with all of those things, they can take advantage of the SSD drive and the Thunderbolt connection so that they can process the native side. Because that's the big thing is like Luna is equal parts native as it is DSP. And that's something that Universal Audio hasn't really done. And one thing to note too is that you can use any plugins in it when you're mixing. Like you can use whatever you want. For tracking, to have the low latency, you have to use UAD plugins. When you go into that low latency mode, it bypasses all native stuff. But the beauty...
Does it bypass it, or does it just let you hit the latency and that's
No,
that?
It bypasses it. It bypasses
That
it.
sucks. I wish it would just like Pro Tools does that too. When you put it in low latency mode, it kills all the plugins.
Right.
And it's just like, it's so annoying.
Yeah.
I mean,
all of the AU plugins for virtual instruments, all AU virtual third-party stuff, that will run low latency. So those don't get bypassed. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to play your instruments.
So it's just like VST plugins, or
it's only AU. So AU
so you would
for
have
your
to
processing
use
plugins
VSTs
and
as a wrapper.
So it's UA. It's funny. It's UA and AU plugins.
Yeah, basically. So yeah, you can load up any AU. I mean, in most virtual instruments you buy, they give you the AU option.
For the Mac, I think the AU option is usually better for whatever.
Isn't there also a third-party wrapping tool that will bundle a VST into an AU shell?
There's a couple, I think.
Because a lot of plugin developers were slow to adopt the AU standard, and some of them still don't do it. So,
but it brings back that inline workflow, which I definitely agree is way easier, way better as just a tracking engineer if you can just like monitor straight through the whole system.
I mean,
and
I got to tell you, it was. I started giggling like a child when I had it all running. I was like, I can't believe this, because I'm a musician. I sing, I play, I write, I do all of that, and so when you sit down and you play. And there's no latency. Like, so many producers are in the programming mindset these days. Like, a lot of people my age and younger, are used to programming everything. But like, I came up playing in bands, and like, if I have a part, I just want to play it. And so it's always been kind of a struggle to fight the buffers and find that. And there's always a little bit of latency, so you just kind of deal with it. But to like sit down and have 2 milliseconds of latency when you're playing, with all of your processing, like you say, it's all in line. It's really exciting, and it really kind of you just worry about creating.
Well, you lose out on the creativity when you're worrying about the technical stuff. I mean, that's driven me away from plenty of projects where I just spend all my time trying to get the sound I want and try to get it to work in the way that I want it to work. So I think that's what they went for with Luna, was being able to let people open it up, load your shit, get it running, and be able to just focus on playing good music.
It's like, besides Pro Tools, it's like the first DSP system to take root, essentially, in a sense. It's like, Fairlight tried it with the CC1 card, and that thing was amazing, incredibly powerful, but it really didn't like have, like, what gives UA a lot of like lift off is the whole plugin thing and their Sonics that basically makes it like a platform worth investing within, because it's expansive there as well. That's the same thing that made Pro Tools launch, was the third-party plugins. Like, truly, like, gave Pro Tools like leaps and bounds against its competitors.
Boy, they should be paying us for these endorsement episodes. But jokes aside, I mean, there's so much good stuff to say about the platform. It just comes down to assessing the feature set and the price point and seeing if it makes sense for you. I think Beau and I were lucky to stumble upon the UA system because it fulfills every need of what we do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's mixing, tracking, doing VO and being able to switch interchangeably between, because I can't tell you how many times I'm working on a mix and an ASAP thing comes in and being able to just switch over and have my workflow for VO ready to go.
Doing VO in Luna?
No, definitely not.
No, it's definitely for music. Yeah. I don't see it. I don't see any.
Like,
yeah, I mean, you
nothing's
could.
stopping you from it, but I'm not going to switch my workflow. I'm perfectly comfortable with Pro Tools, and I know Beau's good with Twisted Wave. So
yeah,
and that's for editing purposes. But what about just like jump on a mic and like if you're using Luna for your primary DAW, then do you at some point switch over? Like, that's my backup recorder too.
I always record in Twisted Wave if I'm not producing. If I'm doing a lot of production in whatever project it is, then I'll use a multi-track like Logic. The thing with Luna is right now it uses all of your resources. Like your CPU is like at 80%, and you're using your DSP and it's doing that to maintain this low latency environment at all times. Like it's going in there and all of that crap that you have to put up with manually with the buffers, it's doing itself. And so it just seems more than you would need. They're not advertising it as a DAW. They're just recording it as they're basically introducing it as just kind of a work environment, a recording environment, a mixing environment, because it's got the essentials to do that, but it's not a full-featured DAW yet. It's going to be a while till it is. There's a lot of things in there missing. Like you can't even export an MP3 at the moment. You know.
So you see it going as a DAW, but right now it's more of a container.
It'll get there.
Well, they lifted a guy from Avid.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
I mean, the rate that they're listening to the community and really taking the feedback seriously and releasing updates, like I can see them getting there sooner rather than later. But for now, I just don't think it makes sense for VO to do that.
Are they doing Windows or are they only doing Mac?
Just Mac right now, yeah. I think Windows will probably come much, much later when they find a stable way to do it, the drivers.
And I have my heart pretty set on Pro Tools right now. If I ever need a backup record, like Pro Tools license isn't working, whatever, I'll use Adobe Audition. But I pretty much use Pro Tools for everything. And so that's just, when you learn the key commands, and if I do ever switch over to a different DAW, then I would probably continue to do all my work in that DAW. Because I'm not a big fan of having to switch environments. For VO, it's simple enough to get one track going and get it done. And sometimes with my VO stuff, if I record in, I may end up turning that VO into more of a production, maybe just as an exercise for myself. I did this more a few years ago, where I would just record in an audition, and after the audition expired, I would then be able to expand that recording into I would practice the mix for it, if I were actually producing the spot when I was trying to get going. And to have an environment where I can just switch into multi-track like that was helpful for me. So really anything that would solve that for somebody would do the trick, but I'm fully Pro Tools now, and I know Beau's Logic when it comes to producing stuff.
I've been Pro Tools since before I was born, I think. Like, I just didn't know it. But
I was in an interview the other day, and I actually had to go back to figure out when I started on Pro Tools. It was 1997.
Wow.
I don't even know what version that would have been.
Pretty much that's like about Pro Tools 3 or Pro Tools 4.
It would have been something like that, yeah.
It was 3 or 4, I believe, because my first introduction with Pro Tools was 2.01, which I don't think there ever was a Pro Tools one. It was Pro Deck and Pro Edit before that. But that was like in college, and when I got out of college, the first thing was 3, and that was the beginning of TDM.
Yes.
Which was like the whole revolutionary DSP thing. I was selling those systems, actually. And yeah, I was like, to me, it was night and day. Like everything else was a complete joke. It was like that or analog, but there was no other way to like reasonably work with computers for multi-track.
Well, my first job was in radio, and I used to record on a tube or valve reel-to-reel using a U47.
Nice.
I'm surprised you weren't cutting wax platters or something, AP, at your age.
Wax cylinders.
Wax cylinders, yeah.
Actually, funny enough, did you guys know this? So I forget who it is, but before like Edison and recording on a record or anything, in the early or mid 1800s, someone messing with film, I think it was film, comes up with a device that basically draws the picture of sound, essentially. And it was only until 2005 or 6 or something where they threw it into a computer and ran that as a waveform to hear the earliest recorded sound ever. It was just never played back until 2005 or 6 or whatever.
So it's kind of almost the first microphone. And he probably wondered, what the hell is this? And then forgot all about it.
Like, what is it for? You know what I mean? Like, what would I use? When would I ever need a microphone? You know, it's one of those questions.
It's like, what do you do with a toothbrush? It's the same confounding problem.
Soap. I mean, there's lots of things like this. Well, there was crazy ideas. I think there was this guy. I think he tried to make this instrument called the teleharmonium, and he wanted to basically be in the middle of New York playing piano and just like piping it to everybody. And in the early days, the way they did this was just like with a crap load of voltage. I think this thing was like a couple of train cars worth of equipment for him to play music. It was like music for your house. That was one of the early crazy ideas that people had.
Absolutely.
Let me ask something back, boiling it down to the real basics for voiceover people that have their Apollo because they were told to go get one by
Any number
some
of people.
producer or fellow voice actor. Should they really be using any plugins at all, period, to get started? Should they really be doing that, or should they just be
to
using
get
it
started?
as a really... Yeah.
No, I
I
think,
truly believe in just like
yeah.
mic straight out.
Please.
That's all I want.
Please, as an audio engineer of 30 years experience, please don't fuck with your voiceovers if you don't know what you're doing. Just record them and send it to me.
Well, just start like, you wouldn't start building houses by like constructing architectural, genius things. You want to start with a foundation, because if you build the rest of the house on top of that, it's going to crumble. And the audio engineers, like Robbo, are going to get mad at you.
Yeah.
From a starting point, just get a nice clean sound. The Apollo pre's are clean. I mean, any of these, mid-tier interfaces that we've been talking about, the Babyface, the Apogee stuff, like
The Focusrite stuff.
the Focusrite, yeah. I mean, get your room together, get a good mic. As Dan says all the time, it's more about the read. Start there. If you get there and you're serving a market, if your clients are putting you in a position where you're needing to serve, for instance, Beau and I that are serving, national brands where it's like we like to deliver stuff that's finished and sounds like it go to air. It makes our clients feel good. And we've put the work in to understand how that stuff works. Guys like you find people have put in the work to understand how that stuff works and how it can add value. But until you know how it works, you're not adding value, you're subtracting value from your business. So start with a clean recording and let that represent you in the best way possible. And you have opportunity to grow from there, but you're only going to hurt yourself if you start out slapping compressors on and limiters and dialing in a gate without knowing it, because then you'll end up clipping the breaths and then Robert's mad at you, and who wants that?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is if you're going to get the Apollo and you do want to jump in guns blazing with a great sound, just talk to an engineer and have them pipe that. The other day, I did a virtual session where I took control of their computer. They were on Source Connect, so I could hear them, and I just went into their console and I adjusted it till it sounded nice and clean with the preamp in compressor that they had in line. And they saved that setting, and that's the one they're going to use. Like you can do that. And then as you go along, you can kind of take on more of that technical side. I really think that the future of voiceover, you need to be responsible for the technical side. You need to know it.
Sure.
You don't have to know it all now, but and the other thing is like engineers have to know how to engineer for everybody, but you don't have to know how to engineer for everybody, just you. So just learn the tools that you need and kind of slowly expand from there and reach out to people that know this stuff and can help you,
See,
I
was just going to say, I would kind of lean the other way. I think you're right. I think as a voiceover artist, especially with a home studio, needs to understand what compression does, how it works, what noise reduction I should maybe be using and how that works. But as an audio engineer, I would rather have just a clean, well-recorded take with no compression, no nothing, unless I ask you for something different. Because if you start compressing, especially with radio, and I want to compress more and all that, it just opens up a big can of worms. I would rather just have a clean take that's well recorded and go from there.
I mean, to be honest, like once things got to 24-bit and they were really sounding really good, I pretty much stopped processing in and stopped worrying about like tracking with compressors and everything else. And I just like mic pre to Pro Tools and do everything else in the box. And then you have complete open possibilities, and the bit depth of 24-bit is enough that you're really not losing any resolution at that point, especially back then with the resolution of the analog side. But it was all so clean, so that you just leave yourselves all the options, or you leave that engineer downstream from you all the options to put all that in there. When, with the one exception of, I agree, like the preamp gets it in great, and you're not fighting something that starts you out sounding thin and worthless. But after the preamp, I don't know that there's a necessity to print anything.
No. Well, I think this illustrates an important point, which is that you're not going to go wrong. There's a bunch of different schools of thought here, and I don't think any of them are necessarily wrong, in that if you are seeking out the proper resources and educating yourself on what the processing could actually do for your voice, it can only help, especially if you're consulting with somebody who knows what they're doing and you're not screwing with that and you trust the decisions that are made. However, you're also never going to go wrong if you just get a clean, nice recording and give your engineer something to work with. Because as we talked about earlier, I record in with the compressor engaged on the Avalon and the EQ if it's commercial and promo. Otherwise, I turn it off. And there's plenty of room to process on top of that. What you end up with is serial compression on the voice, because multiple stages of compression are being done anyway. If I'm taking care of the first step of that chain in a very calculated move for something that's beneficial to my voice, who's ever going to say no to that? And if they're really picky about it, it's a weird project and they need it done a specific way, then you take it off.
I would think that the bigger reason is just so that you can read into the compressor and like kind of feel it a little bit, and kind of like singers like that a lot.
Well,
like
I'll
track with the compressor in Pro Tools so that they're hitting it and they're working, but I'm not printing it. I'm just
I actually set up a system for a very well, one of the big ones in promo, so that he's monitoring through his Vox box, but not tracking through the Vox box, because he's so in love of himself and his headphones through that 3-to-1 compressor. But the studios were like, oh, okay, can you turn that off? So I, like a musician tracking through, a singer tracking through, monitoring through reverb.
It's comfort compression.
I'm setting up comfort compression for some people now, realizing that that's a thing they just, wrong or right, you can judge them all they want as they live in their nice large home very comfortably. But they have a technique that works for them, and that's what they're used to.
Sure.
And so I'm trying, my job is to enable the actor to use the tools that at their disposal to eke out that performance that's going to hopefully land them that promo gig away from their friend who already has that promo gig next week.
Yeah.
And that happens all day, every day.
Yeah.
I get files saying, I shouldn't have this, but here's this guy reading this thing. Can I sound like that? Just like I'm doing that all damn day. It's such a weird thing. But I the other thing I do is I'll, like a client today, she was very green. I was like, send me an audio file. And I'm not kidding. She had a Neumann TLM-103 and an Apollo. And I said, send me an audio file. And she said, well, I don't have any yet. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I haven't recorded anything yet. And I'm like, oh, okay. We're really starting from scratch. So all I did was listen in and over Source Connect and Source Connect Now, and I just set up an initial EQ, just to what I call a corrective EQ, just to kind of tune up her closet so it sounded a little less closety. And that's where we started from. And I said, here's how you turn your gain up and down. And that was it. And I said, don't touch that. That's it.
See, I'll go with that. But here's a question for AP that occurs to me listening to you guys talk. I know, AP, you don't record with any compression when you're doing stuff from home. But does that mean you've got to rely more on your mic technique? Is that something that we're saying is getting lost here? That if we're running some compression over, that we're losing that skill of mic technique?
Well, actually, I do use a bit of compression for a couple of clients, but majority of the time, no, it's just straight in, microphone, preamp, if I know there's going to be an engineer at the other end. But if there isn't going to be, and this is where it gets tricky, is that some clients, they're not going to touch it, which is what we've talked about with the affiliates in America. And in that case, if I sent out stuff that's not processed at all, that's what's going to go to air, basically.
With promos for a long time, they were moving so fast that there was barely any time to mix. And so the promo guys were putting EQ and compression on their voice, and literally some of those promos were recorded straight onto another track of a beta tape. So they would connect on ISDN and they would roll it. And I think after that, they would slip it later. And they were just mixing like really fast, getting these promos done. And I think that's a lot where that process, or industrials, that they get mixed out of the Avid, and it's never even going to see like an audio person. Like, so those times make sense to print stuff through. But sometimes
affiliate.
Yeah,
TV affiliate stuff definitely is.
Sure.
Unfortunately, landing into that category.
But like having stuff printed, I mean, because literally, like the other problem is like then when you go to another setup or you're in a different studio, so if you don't have all that processing on it, two very dissimilar mics can sound more similar than trying to chase the mic and the processing that was done in one place and not in another place. And so if you're cutting in some of these ad campaigns, you're cutting in people that like we recorded you 3 years ago and like, man, we got the wrong numbers and we can't get him back and we got to change the price. And your assistant's looking through 3 years of stuff. And so when it cuts easier because it's just more straight to tape, it kind of makes people's jobs easier sometimes by doing less.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're all saying, because I've been in the engineering seat before, and have gotten stuff from people that's hardly passable. What I'm saying is like the future of voiceover, you need to be more responsible for your finished sound. You just do, because most clients out there aren't going to go through a third-party studio. They're not going to, especially for industrial and sizzle type stuff. Like it needs to be done. And
that I agree with entirely.
Well, I mean, that's just how it is, whether we agree or not. Like that's such a large part of what I do that it's like, I remember the first time I did network promo and I bypassed everything, and then I heard it on air and it sounded like ass because they didn't do anything to it. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to use my settings because this is me. I'm representing me. And so from that point forward on those shows, I kept it on and everything sounded way better after that. And so, there obviously is a balance. If you don't know anything about what you're doing, yeah, go clean. But I remember when I first started in music, everybody was saying, go clean, go clean, go clean. Don't print anything. Don't stop. Don't even think about it. And it wasn't until 5-6 years later when I realized, oh, you know what? Actually going through processing is a good thing because it forces you to commit. And then when you commit, you can learn from the mistakes that you've made and course correct. And I think as a voice actor, if you're not comfortable doing it, definitely don't do it. But take some time to experiment and get to know your tools. I mean, especially if you're going to buy something like an Apollo. I mean, you've got the world at your fingertips with that thing, and it's amazing. And you can sound, you can tone shape. One of the reasons that the Avalon is so popular is because it's like a source maker. Other things where you're going in and making changes, you can really tell. You're like, oh my gosh, he's going through that 1176. I can tell it's got that sizzle. But if you can do some bass processing that's very, very subtle and transparent, but it brings out the things in your voice that are attractive to clients, then it's worth learning, and you should. It should. This is your tool. This is your toolkit.
Those are the kind of things that guys like George can help you figure out, because it's not doing too much, but it's doing just enough to bring out the goods.
Right. Exactly.
What's interesting is Apogee's new mic. What is it called? The Hype
mic.
Yeah, one of the things about it is it's got a compressor built into it, an analog compressor, I think.
They actually invited me and Tim Friedlander down to their studio to try that out. I'm intrigued by it, but I wasn't overly impressed at how the compressor sounded. So,
is it pretty heavy-handed, or how's it?
It was pretty heavy-handed to me. Granted, it was a new monitoring environment. I had headphones on and different headphones I didn't know. Blah blah blah. It sounded very sharp to me, like the aggression of like a FET compressor, which is almost never the sound that I like for voiceover. The application I would imagine that would be useful for is you're on a trip and have no other options and just need this small thing to pull out of your bag and you just want to tame some peaks. I don't think it will disservice you at that point, but I wouldn't use it for anything beyond that.
MXL did this 10 years ago. It's called the Studio 24. It was a USB mic with a 24-bit converter. Not a very clean mic, pretty noisy. But it had a control panel that let you set the DSP inside the mic.
Yeah.
And it was really early days, and it wasn't really great, but it was a window into the future. It was really... I was really excited about it, but it just didn't sound all that great. It was kind of noisy.
Well, in a whole other league, did you see the new Chandler mic that has like tube tape, like all sorts of EQ settings on it? That is like the real deal. They put a TG console inside the mic, and you can make all these changes.
That thing is so popular in Nashville right now. There's so many Nashville producers I'm seeing using it. They freaking love that thing.
crazy. I haven't seen it yet, but I'll check it
Yeah,
out.
it's awesome.
And it's not a cheap mic either. I think it's like a $4,000 or $5,000 mic.
You're making Robbo and Robert like just really, really upset.
Leave it alone.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch that dial. Isn't that the saying?
Yeah. It's funny talking about the compressor. I always run everything through the compressor anyway, whether it's switched on or not. And I do know the LA610 does have a proper bypass, but I don't know about the 2254, the Neve. I have a feeling that there's a bit of coloration as it goes through there. Could be wrong. Bits and pieces on the way
You get
through.
some nice tone off of the. I've got a couple of stay units here, and you don't even have to compress with those. You just go through them, and it's just like ooh.
Yep. Tone boxes.
Right.
There's actually a new mic from the new AKG company called Austrian Audio.
Yeah.
Some guy online said I have one. I was like, cool, dude. I will do a free consult with you just so I can play with it over the internet on Source Connect. And he was like, awesome. So we're going to be doing that soon. But that mic is like the sweet spot between, I think, the L22 and just a conventional mic where you use a Bluetooth remote app on your phone to program its internals down to the pickup pattern. You can literally build your pickup pattern, your proximity effect, everything, and it's hardwired into the mic. And that seems to me like a really awesome middle ground between those.
The thing I find really interesting about that OC818 is it's a stereo mic. So at the back, if you don't use the Bluetooth thing, you can plug in a mini XLR to a standard XLR, and then you can run it into 2 channels of a preamp. And then in post, you can go in with their app, and you can adjust the polar pattern at the different
Doesn't the
frequencies.
L22 do the same thing? Isn't there 2 cables for it?
Yeah, and also
Same idea.
Yeah.
Loughton, or is it Lewitt or
Lewitt,
Loughton?
yeah.
One,
Lewitt, yeah.
Lewitt has a mic that does the same thing.
They were I think they
Lewitt
did that
mics are
before
so
the
good.
L22 even.
I think actually Pearl was the first company to make a mic that just had 2 capsules facing back to back like that. Was it? But they didn't put together the change your polar pattern later. It was just like a 180 stereo mic.
See, for how much I advocate for processing on the way in, when you know what you're doing, I admittedly really don't like the whole mic modeling revolution that's happening. And Beau has expressed his love for the L22 to me so many times. I have a Slate mic, and I just don't like emulating microphones. Call me weird, but I am so not on board with it yet. Maybe I'll get there, but I don't know.
You were so old, new, old school.
Yeah, that's what it is. I just really enjoy getting the real deal. And that's kind of a lifelong pursuit because mics are expensive and I don't need that many of them, but I don't know.
I have some great boutique real deal mics here, and I had the Slate, and the Slate gave me more
And
problems
you
than
just
it
burned
solved.
them since you got the
Mic porn, mic
L22.
porn.
I have a couple of 47. I have a matched pair of 47s that were built
Those
by
are
a guy
so
named
good.
Chad Kelly, and it's all new old stock from era correct parts, and they're wonderful. I love them. And I've got the Mojave MA1000. It's like a modern 251. That thing is gorgeous. And I also have a C12 build here that's just out of this world. And then you load up the L22 and you just start giggling because you're like,
If it's a
this sounds
biography,
amazing.
yeah.
I still think the MA1000 is, sounds better than the 251 emulation to what, Carson's saying. However, it's unreal how good it sounds. That it still blows me away. And the thing that I've noticed with all of the mic modeling is that if you take away the emulations, what does the microphone sound like? And so far, the L22 is the best sounding, in my opinion. You wouldn't even have, if the companies went away tomorrow and you were just left with this microphone, could you use it? And it's like, absolutely. It sounds great. So, that's kind of a big win, I think, is they actually built a microphone that you can feel proud to have, It sounds really good.
Well, here's a story for you, talking about classic microphones, and I met Martin from Austrian Audio when they were over here promoting their microphones. And we were talking about the capsule because AKG had been working on trying to get back to the old C12 capsule, the CK12 capsule. And so they grabbed a whole bunch of mics from some pretty high-profile people who had original C12s. But the interesting one was Quincy Jones. He sent his C12 across, and he raved about this microphone. It's the best-sounding microphone. It's just, I use it on everything, blah, blah, blah. It was broken, and he didn't know.
We have that exact same story for a studio here in Chicago. They used to always like brag about its C12, and the joke amongst all the engineers, like, you just didn't want to plug it in because it was like, bring. It was like a not maintained busted C12, but they're like, we have a C12, and then you're like, okay, let's get the 87.
You remember when George asked the closing question like 20 minutes ago? Those were good times.
Well, that's the beauty of editing. It's not a problem.
Oh, sure. And it's good conversation. So
Wait till you hear what I edit out of this interview.
Nothing.
Exactly.
you post it up. It's like, hi, I'm Beau. Hi, I'm Carson. Mics are cool. All right, thank you.
Yeah. I agree that we shouldn't print a tape. Goodbye.
Yeah. Yes.
Instagram cut.
That's right.
And AP recorded to wax. Yes, that's about it.
I was born in 1862. This show was mixed by Voodoo Sound. Edit by Andrew Peters, using Source Connect Now and Rode microphones, with technical support from George the Tech Whittam. Don't forget to subscribe and like us.
You're looking for trouble.